You want to know how I found out my son was planning to sell my house out from under me? It wasn't a private investigator. It wasn't a suspicious neighbor. It was a text message meant for his wife that landed in my phone by mistake. One text, 47 words. And my entire world shifted on its axis. My name is Dorothy, and I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a high school principal in Columbus, Ohio. I raised 2 children, my son Marcus and my daughter Yvette, on a teacher's salary after my husband Gerald passed from a heart attack in 2009. I did not crumble. I did not move in with relatives or sell the house and downsize into something I could barely afford. I refinanced, picked up evening tutoring work, and I kept the house on Cloverfield Drive that Gerald and I bought together in 1994, 4 bedrooms. A magnolia tree in the backyard that blooms every April. A kitchen where I made 30 years of Sunday dinners. That house is not just property. That house is the proof that I survived. So when Marcus called me on a Tuesday afternoon in October and said he wanted to bring his wife Simone over for dinner that weekend because they had something exciting to share, I assumed the usual things a grandmother hopes for. I set the table with the good dishes. I made pot roast. I even bought a small bunch of sunflowers for the centerpiece because Simone once mentioned 2 years ago at Thanksgiving that sunflowers were her favorite. That is the kind of woman I am. I remember. They arrived 40 minutes late without a call or a text. Simone walked in first, already typing on her phone, and kissed me on the cheek without making eye contact. Marcus followed with a bottle of wine I hadn't asked for, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I noticed. Mothers always notice. But I put the pot roast on the table and I poured the sweet tea and I waited. The exciting news, Marcus told me over dinner, was that he and Simone had found their dream home. A new construction in a suburb called Harrowfield, about 40 minutes from the city. 5 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, a community pool. He described it the way men describe things they have already decided. Not asking, announcing. I told him I was happy for them and asked how they planned to afford it. The question wasn't unkind. It was practical. Marcus is a project manager at a mid-size logistics firm. Simone works part-time at a boutique she co-owns with her college roommate. The boutique is charming. It is not profitable. I know because Marcus told me himself 18 months ago when they needed me to co-sign a business loan for her. Which I did. Marcus looked at Simone. Simone looked at her wine glass. And then Marcus said, very carefully, that they had been thinking that with the house being so large, just me alone in it now, and the market being what it was, that perhaps I might consider selling. I put my fork down. He kept talking. He said the proceeds could be split fairly, that I could use my portion to buy something smaller, something easier to maintain, maybe one of those 55 and older communities out near where his aunt lived. He said the word comfortable 4 times. He said it just makes sense twice. Simone nodded along and once said exactly under her breath as though she were sitting in a boardroom and not at my dinner table, eating my pot roast, sitting 3 feet from the sunflowers I bought for her. I asked them to let me think about it. That was the first lie I told them. I was not going to think about it. There was nothing to think about. This house belonged to me. Gerald and I scrimped and saved for the down payment. I refinanced it in my name alone after he died. I replaced the roof in 2015 and the water heater in 2021. I planted that magnolia tree with my own hands. The idea of selling it so that Marcus and Simone could afford a house with a 3-car garage and a community pool was not a thought I was willing to entertain for a single moment. But I said I would think about it because I wanted them to leave so I could breathe. After they drove away, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. I looked at the sunflowers in the centerpiece. I thought about the fact that Marcus had not once, during that entire dinner, asked me where I would want to live. He had only told me where I should. 2 weeks passed. I didn't bring it up, and neither did he. I told myself perhaps they'd dropped it. Perhaps Simone had found another solution. I went back to my routine, my morning walks, my Thursday bridge club, my Friday calls with Yvette, who lives in Atlanta and who, when I told her what happened, went very quiet on the phone and then said, "Mom, do not sign a single piece of paper." I wasn't planning to, but I also wasn't prepared for what came next. It was a Thursday evening in November. I was sitting in the living room grading scholarship essays for a foundation I volunteer with, and my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I assumed it was my friend Carolyn from Bridge Club, who texts at odd hours. I picked it up. It was from Marcus. But it was not meant for me. She's stalling. We need to move faster. Harrowfield's holding the lot until December 15th, and the realtor says Cloverfield could list at $410. That's more than enough for the down payment, and then some. I'll handle her. She just needs to feel like it was her idea. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the coffee table and I sat with my hands folded in my lap and I looked at the magnolia tree through the back window. Bare now in November. And I breathed in. And I breathed out. He had texted me instead of Simone. 1 letter difference in the contact names. An honest mistake that told me everything. I'll handle her. She just needs to feel like it was her idea. I was her. I was something to be handled. The house I had maintained alone for 14 years. The house I had protected through a recession and a pandemic and a grief. So heavy some mornings I could not lift my arms above my head. That house was a down payment. And my son, the boy I had walked to his first day of kindergarten, the boy I had driven to chess tournaments and debate meets, and sat in the front row for his college graduation. That boy was going to manage me like a project. I did not call him. I did not respond to the text. I set the phone down and I made a decision that I have not once regretted. The next morning I called my attorney. Her name is Patricia Webb, and she has handled my legal affairs for 11 years. I told her everything. I told her about the dinner, the proposal, the text message. Patricia listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said, "Dorothy, you need to do 3 things. The first thing was to update my will immediately. The house was already in my name alone. But my existing will had left it equally to Marcus and Yvette, with the understanding that either could buy out the other, or they could sell jointly. Patricia said we needed to change that. We redrafted it that same week. The house would go to Yvette outright, with a cash sum set aside for Marcus. He would not receive a share of the property itself. Patricia notarized everything on a Friday afternoon while rain came down against her office windows, and I felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't realized had been loose. The second thing was to cancel the power of attorney I had given Marcus 2 years prior. Something I'd done casually, thinking it wise to have someone local able to act on my behalf if I were ever incapacitated. Patricia said that under the circumstances, I should revoke it immediately and assign it to Yvette instead. We did that the same day. The third thing Patricia told me to do was to say nothing. Not yet. Keep my expression neutral, my phone calls warm, my Sunday dinners unchanged. Let Marcus believe the plan was still on track. Let him think I was still thinking it over. Because information, Patricia said, is only power if the other side doesn't know you have it. I am a woman who spent 31 years managing a building full of teenagers and their parents. I know how to keep a composed face. The next time Marcus called 4 days later, cheerful, asking if I'd given any more thought to the Cloverfield situation, I told him I was warming up to the idea but wanted to understand the numbers better before I committed to anything. He sounded so relieved. He said, "Mom, I really think this is the right move for everyone." I said, "I'm sure you do, sweetheart." He did not catch the difference. Simone called me the following week. This was unusual. Simone and I were not phone call women. We were polite at holidays and vague at birthdays, and that had been enough for both of us. But she called on a Wednesday afternoon, and her voice was warm in a way it rarely was with me, and she asked how I was doing, really doing, and whether I'd thought about what it might feel like to have less to worry about, to live somewhere with a maintenance staff and neighbors my own age. She said she'd driven past a lovely community near her mother's neighborhood and thought of me. She thought of me. After 2 years of barely making eye contact at family dinners, she thought of me. I told her that was very kind and that I appreciated her concern. I asked about the boutique. She talked for 6 minutes about a new line of candles she was stocking. I said they sounded lovely. We hung up. I sat down and wrote the date and content of the call in a notebook I had started keeping, the same way I used to document parent complaints when I was a principal. Date, time, what was said, what was implied. Evidence isn't assembled in a crisis. It's assembled before one. Thanksgiving arrived. Marcus and Simone came. Yvette flew in from Atlanta. I made the full spread turkey, cornbread dressing, sweet potatoes, with the marshmallows on top the way Gerald's mother used to make it. Yvette helped me in the kitchen, and we didn't speak about any of it because I had asked her not to, not yet. I watched Marcus at the table the way he looked around the dining room, with its familiar furniture and its photographs on the wall, and I could see him calculating. Not celebrating. Calculating. After dinner, while Simone was in the living room showing Yvette something on her phone, Marcus followed me into the kitchen, under the guise of helping with dishes, and said he'd spoken with a realtor, a friend of Simone's family, very discreet. She'd done a walk-through assessment of the neighborhood and thought Cloverfield could realistically list at $415,000 in the spring. He said it with the tone of a man delivering good news. I handed him a dish towel and said, "Is that right?" He said they could help me find something perfect. He said I deserved to be taken care of. He said Gerald would have wanted me to be comfortable. He said Gerald's name. I dried my hands on my own towel and I looked at my son, and I thought about the 31 years I had given to this house, and the 14 I had held it alone, and the text message that said I'll handle her, and I said, very calmly, Marcus, I appreciate you sharing that. Let's talk after the new year. I want to enjoy today. He hugged me. He said I was the best. He went back to the living room. I stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at the magnolia tree in the backyard, dark and bare against the November sky, and I let myself feel the full weight of it. Not the anger, not yet, but the grief. The particular grief of being seen clearly by someone who loves you and finding out that what they see is an obstacle. I gave myself 10 minutes. Then I dried my eyes, put the sweet potato dish in a container for Yvette to take back to Atlanta, and went to join my family in the living room. The new year came. January passed. Marcus texted twice, asking if I was ready to move forward. I replied both times that I was still thinking, still praying on it, still not quite ready. He was patient. He thought he had time. He thought I was an old woman who needed to be guided gently to a conclusion he had already written. In February, I called him on a Sunday afternoon and asked if he could come over alone, not Simone, just him. I told him I wanted to talk about the house. He arrived within the hour. That told me everything about how much he wanted this. I made coffee. I set out the pecan cookies he had loved since he was 8 years old. I waited until he was settled at the kitchen table with his mug in both hands. And then I told him the following things in a voice as even as a floorboard. I told him I knew about the December 15th Harrowfield deadline. I told him I had read his text, the one meant for Simone. I watched the color leave his face. I told him I had updated my will in November and that the house was no longer part of his inheritance. I told him I had revoked his power of attorney. I placed copies of both documents on the table between us, because Patricia had advised me to have them ready, and I watched my son stare at papers he never expected to see. I did not raise my voice. I had spent 31 years not raising my voice in rooms where other people were falling apart, and I was not about to stop now. I told him I was not angry. That was not entirely true. But anger was not the thing I most needed him to understand. What I needed him to understand was this. I had built something. I had held something together through more loss and more hard years than he would know, until he was much older. And I had done it alone. And it was mine. Not mine to be managed. Not mine to be a solution to someone else's real estate ambitions. Mine. I told him that I loved him. That part was completely true. I told him that until he could come to me as my son and not as someone who had a plan for me, I needed some distance. That I would still answer the phone. That I would still be his mother, but that the Sunday dinners and the holidays and the casual dropping by those would need to wait until I believed that the person walking through my door was the boy I raised and not the man who sent that text. Marcus cried. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't thought about it that way, that Simone had been the one who, and then he stopped himself, which was wise. I was not interested in who had originated the idea. I was interested in the fact that he had carried it to my dinner table and presented it as care. He left after an hour. He left the pecan cookies. That bothered me more than I expected. Yvette called that night and asked how it went. I told her. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Mom, I want you to know you're not alone in this house." Not really. I knew what she meant. She meant the magnolia tree, and the cornbread dressing, and the photographs on the wall. She meant Gerald. She meant 30 years of a life that did not require selling to be worth something. I slept well that night for the first time in months. It is April now. The magnolia is blooming again. I had coffee on the back porch this morning and watched the branches move in the wind, white flowers against a pale blue sky, and I thought about what it means to protect something not because it is perfect, but because it is yours. Marcus and I have spoken 4 times since February. The conversations are shorter than they used to be and more honest, which is a trade I am willing to accept for now. He and Simone found a townhouse in the city. They are renting. He told me last week that he had been doing a lot of thinking. I told him I was glad. I did not sell my house. I did not move to a 55 and older community near someone's aunt. I did not let myself be handled. I am 63 years old. I am a retired principal and a real estate owner and a woman who kept every receipt, documented every conversation, and updated her will before anyone knew what she knew. I am a mother who loves her son enough to tell him the truth, even when the truth costs something. And every April, without fail, the magnolia blooms.